This is attorney Katie Frekhtman. I'm a New York City personal injury attorney, and I'm here today to answer an FAQ and specifically a comment that somebody left actually today. And I thought it was a really interesting question, and it's a very common question, and it really has to deal with how you determine what a personal injury case is worth and putting a value on an injury, putting a value on what a case is worth. And the question came from, I believe it was somebody, a username by myself, and he asked, how do you determine pain and suffering? I had 6 epidurals for a herniated disc, and I'm having an upcoming percutaneous discectomy surgery. And so how do you determine what the pain and suffering will be? And this was like a follow-up question. His original question was, am I limited to the medical bills? So my medical bills were $40,000. Am I going to just get the $40,000, or can I obtain more than the medical bills? And of course, different jurisdictions, different localities decide this in different ways. In some places, it is medical bills, and they have like multipliers, like medical bills times 3 is usually what cases settle for. In New York, we don't have that. We have what's known as no fault. So there's one insurance policy that pays for all your medical care, kind of like health insurance, up to $50,000. And then there's another insurance policy for the vehicle that is at fault, and then that is your bodily injury, and that's where you get all your money from, your pain and suffering. But I think to answer this question, we really have to focus on how we determine pain and suffering. And so the way to determine pain and suffering is just to prepare and build up the case. The attorney handling the case has to build it up and actually try to obtain the maximum for each element of damages. So the place to start is to look in the pattern jury instructions, and each state and each location will have jury instructions. And there are different elements. I mean, most places will allow for pain, right? Pain and suffering. That is a jury instruction that is an element that you can recover for. Then the next one will be, like your loss of enjoyment of life. And in New York, that just means not being able to do your daily tasks, your activities, things that you did before you got hurt. And so other things could be inconvenience. They could be disfigurement, like if you have a scar. And so those are known as non-economic damages. And those, some people call those the human damages, because those are things that really affect your ability to enjoy life. So for example, with the category of loss of enjoyment of life, you would want to illustrate that, right? You wouldn't want to just say, my loss of enjoyment of life, I'm claiming 100,000, or I'm claiming 1 million, or I'm claiming 10 million. But you'd really want to illustrate that and show it. So the person who's injured, the plaintiff, would testify, and they would explain how, they've lost their ability to enjoy life, how their life has changed. And then you can call witnesses like friends, family, community witnesses to also illustrate. And it's good to tell a story. So maybe a story of, like, for example, if a father playing catch with his son or his daughter, and now after the injury, a painful percutaneous discectomy surgery, epidural injections to the spine, maybe now they can't throw the ball, or whatever story is relevant to your life. So maybe you like to play sports or go dancing or whatever activities you do. And so I think that's very powerful. And then the other element of damages that you can obtain are economic damages. So those are things like your lost wages. And those are more concrete, because if you're making, let's say, $50,000 a year and you're not able to work a year, then you show your W-2s or your 1099s, and then you get your $50,000 back, your lost salary. And in addition to that, you can have medical expenses. So for example, this individual, right, he's had $40,000 in medical expenses. If they weren't covered by any collateral source, if they weren't covered and he's responsible for them, then he should get them back. Past medical expenses for the epidurals, and he's going to have future medical expenses. He's going to need a percutaneous discectomy surgery. A surgery like that, I believe, could be worth, just the surgery itself could be over $10,000, maybe even $15,000. So that could be pretty serious. And then the other thing with past and future medical expenses is that you really have to look at the cost of living, because then you have to look at how old the individual is. Because very often the individual plaintiff is going to be a young person. Like I was preparing a case actually that was going to go to trial in New York. I got adjourned. It was supposed to go to trial actually tomorrow. And there the individual is only in his 20s. So I looked at the pattern jury instruction book, and they have life expectancy tables, and he was supposed to live 50.1 future years. So for example, all of those things, right? The pain, it's for 50 future years. So even if like the jury were to allow for like $1,000 a year, it's $50,000, right? Even something as cheap as $1,000 a year. But if it's more, then obviously it just goes up from there. And the same thing, right? Medical expenses. If the doctors will testify that somebody will need medical treatment, like physical therapy, even like once or twice a week, but for like 50 years, and then future surgeries, oftentimes with serious injuries like a fusion surgery, you get the surgery, but then you need a revision, you might need insertion, a removal of hardware, So there's just one surgery is $100,000, and if you need a few of them, like this person is getting a percutaneous discectomy, that's usually a minimally invasive procedure where the leak in the disc is removed. So that may not need a revision, but it may lead to a fusion surgery down the road. But depending on what the doctor will say and what the opinions of the medical expert, that could turn into a really big case, right? So it goes for everything. And actually, when I was preparing that case, I saw a slide and I thought, well, what's the best way to illustrate 50 years? And it's not just, it's all these different elements, right? The inconvenience, the harm, the loss of enjoyment of life, the pain, the suffering, the lost wages, the medical expenses. And then I saw, well, what was the cost of living 50 years ago? So 50 years ago, it was like 1972. And the costs were so much different than they are today. And a jury verdict, you only get one chance to be before a jury, right? You get one shot, and that's it. Whatever the jury gives you is how much you were ever going to get for this particular case, for this particular injury. And if it is a life-changing forever injury, then you have to make that known to the jurors, and you have to obviously spend time selecting the right jurors, people that are open to the possibility of allowing for millions and millions of dollars if the case is worth that. So the point was that in 1972, a house was like $30,000, the average cost of a house. A car was like $2,800. But today, a new car is like $30,000. I would say a cheap car is $30,000, right? And a nice car is probably much more. And a house, I mean, depending on where, but an average price of a house, depending on where you live, like in the New York City area, probably, I don't know, the average price of a house is approaching $1 million. Maybe a really bad house is like, 600, 700,000 somewhere in the suburbs or upstate, but housing prices have really gone up. So then you have to consider that. Is that still going to continue in the same vein? If it was 3,000 50 years ago and now it's like 800,000, is the same thing going to happen? Is the 800,000 going to turn into like the average price of a home is going to be like 10 million in 50 years? We don't know, right? So a lot of it is being almost like clairvoyant. And it's very hard to know what's going to happen in 50 years. But as somebody who's trying to persuade the jury to allow for the maximum compensation for my client, that's something we could look to, what it was 50 years ago, and then we have to look 50 years ahead. And, I like to couch it as that's civil justice. What is civil justice? What is it worth? You have to put a value on it. So this is a really, really huge topic, and there's a lot of different things. But the important thing to remember is the way that you pick the jury, the way that you build the case, so you have the evidence, both from the experts, the doctors, the liability, and then the way that you present the case to the jury so that you can get the maximum for each element. But it's definitely good to go through all the elements, like the ones we have in New York include pain and suffering, and they include loss of enjoyment of life, lost wages, medical expenses. But to answer his question, I think he said he was from the Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania, and I don't think it's too different from New York. I'd have to check with some local attorneys as to the value, but in New York, we've settled percutaneous discectomy cases anywhere from $250,000 up to $550,000. Those are settlements. And verdicts, I think we had one verdict, I believe, also $547,000, another verdict for $350,000. but those were a few years ago. Those were like from 2017. So I think today, if the case was really prepared and you had everything lined up, potentially you could either settle it for more than $500,000 or take a verdict for more than $1 million, because it is a serious injury. So I hope this helps. Let us know what other questions you have, and we are here for you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.